Hello students, welcome to the daily news analysis. I am your educator Fcras and today we will be discussing the important news articles for 9th of February 2022. Let us understand the first news article on the screen. Now guys, this news article talks about the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA, shortly called as FCRA. Now Ministry of Home Affairs has come up with a notification to renew the FCRA for a NGO called as Public Health Foundation of India. Right now, in order to understand this issue, we must have an understanding of FCRA or Foreign Contribution Regulations Act. Now guys, FCRA regulates the foreign donations. It regulates the foreign donations in India and ensures that such contributions do not adversely affect the internal security, because internal security, national security, sovereignty and integrity of the nation are the protector of them is the government, right? So therefore it is the duty of the government to protect and the internal security of the country, right? Now there have been many instances where it was seen that some foreign institutions giving donations to various NGOs in India by the financial support, and in this way they are able to achieve their objective in our country, right? So in order to regulate such foreign donations which are being given to various agencies, various NGOs, and allegedly they are being used against the integrity and sovereignty of our country, to protect such donations or to regulate such donations, FCRA was being enacted. It first came in the year 1976, right? And however, it was amended in the year 2010 when a slew of new measures were adopted, right? So in this way, the FCRAs are applicable to all the associations, guys, all the associations, groups and NGOs which intend to receive foreign donations, right? And it is mandatory for all such NGOs to register themselves under the FCRA. So those NGOs which intend to get some foreign contributions, some foreign funds, have to register themselves under this act, Foreign Contribution Regulations Act. This came into the year 1976 for the first time, and the amendment to it was done in the year 2010, correct? So the foreign donations would be regulated under this act. Now the registration is initially valid for 5 years and it can be renewed subsequently if they comply with all the norms. So once an NGO has got the registration under FCRA, it would sustain it for 5 years, and it can be extended only when the NGO is complying with all the norms, right? Now the registered associations can receive the foreign contribution for social, educational, religious, economic and cultural purposes, and filing of annual returns. They have to file the annual returns on the lines of income tax, correct? Now there have been alleged controversies where various NGOs were being found to be misusing the funds, right? And the foreign agencies were actually using the funds to actually accomplish their own targets. So therefore this act came into being. So FCRA would cover any donation, delivery or transfer made by any foreign source of any article, as long as it is not given as a gift, right? So donations are acceptable. Delivery or transfer made by any foreign source of article is acceptable as long as it is not in the form of gift or personal use, or if its market value in India at the time it was being made is not more than such sum as may be specified from time to time, right? So the thing is that the FCRA which is to be given, it should not be in the form of gift, right? Number one. Now if the examiner might also ask you that, can NRIs give the FCRAs or foreign donations? Can the foreign donations be given by NRIs? So the answer is no, right? So they may ask you in the objective examination, which among the following are come under the are allowed to give donations under FCRA. So the donations made by NRIs are not considered to be the foreign contribution. Very, very important. I I expect a question on this. So donations which the NRIs are making would not be considered as foreign contributions, although the donations coming from person of Indian origin, POI. Now POI are different from NRI because POI are those Indians who have assumed the foreign nationality, right? So those individuals, those Indians who have already assumed or have taken the foreign nationality, they have become the foreign citizens of any particular country, are called as POI, person of Indian origin, and they are, treated, their contribution is definitely treated as foreign contribution, whereas the contribution of NRIs is not considered to be a foreign contribution under FCRA. Now if I talk about the timeline of FCRA, you can see on the screen, it was first enacted in the year 1976, right? So first enacted in the year 1976. Guys, this is the same year when internal emergency was imposed by Indira Gandhi government. You all know that internal emergency was imposed from 1975 till 1977, right? So during this time period, in order to keep track of the foreign influence of social, political, economic and religious decisions, the FCRA came into being, right? So this is how you can memorize the things. However, the non-profits were allowed to freely receive foreign donations while reporting the amount spent and received every year, right? So they were freely allowed to receive the foreign donations. So there was no, check over them. Now in 1984, it became mandatory for the non-profit organizations to register before receiving foreign donations. So now it became mandatory that in order to receive the foreign donations, the NGO has to first register, with the Ministry of Home Affairs before receiving the foreign donations, and they cannot pass the funds on other non-registered NGOs, right? So the NGO has to get registration, right, under FCRA. Now post 1984, in 2010, the FCRA Act was amended. It was repealed and replaced by stricter Foreign Contribution Act of 2010, right? Now post the opening up of our economy in the year 1991, many foreign donations started coming into India, and therefore some stricter FCRA was being imposed in the year 2010, along with the Foreign Contribution Regulation rules of 2011, right? Now the key changes that were introduced are, first, the FCRA registration validity, which was permanent earlier. As you can see, it was permanent. Non-profits organizations were allowed to freely receive donations while reporting to amount spent and received every year, right? So it was a permanent membership. But here the clause was changed. That means those who are registered, the membership is not permanent, but it has been reduced to 5 years subject to renewal, right? So every 5 years, the ministry would check, their accounts, and if it's being found that the foreign funds are being misappropriated, is being misutilized, then definitely the action may be taken and they may lose their registration, right? Number 2, only 50% foreign contributions could be used for administrative expenses, right? So out of the total foreign contributions, 50% of that can be used for administrative expenses. No such provision existed under the 1976 Act. So the second change that FCRA 2010 amendment made was that out of the total foreign contributions, 50% of that only can be used in administrative expenses, right? So earlier it was the case that the NGOs was to say that all the donations are being utilized for administrative expenses. So they were actually taking the, I would say, help of administrative expenses, but now they cannot do so. Only 50% of that can be used for administrative expenses, right? Now in 2020, a bill was being circulated in the Parliament, FCRA Amendment Bill 2020. It broadly redefined the terms related to acceptance, transfer and utilization of foreign contributions under 2010 Act, right? So we'll now study the 2010 FCRA Amendment Bill. So the journey from 1976 to 1984 2010 Amendment Act and the 2020 Amendment Bill. Now who cannot receive foreign donations. It is very clearly says that the members of the legislature and the political parties, all the government officials, the judges, the media persons, so very importantly media. So media also cannot receive the foreign contributions. Very important. They are prohibited from receiving any foreign contribution. However, in 2017, the Ministry of Home Affairs, through the finance bill route, amended the 1976 repealed FCRA law, paving the way for political parties. So in 2017, the Ministry of Home Affairs has, through a finance bill, they have amended the 1976 Act, and now they have given a way to the political parties to receive the funds from Indian subsidiary of a foreign company. Right? That means any Indian subsidiary of a foreign company, let's say a foreign company, any company XYZ working in India, it has its Indian subsidiary, then it can give donations to political party, right? Or a foreign company in which Indian holds 50% of more shares. So any Indian holding 50% or more shares, right, in any of the foreign company, such companies also can fund the political parties, right? So the political parties may receive funds from the Indian subsidiary of the foreign company, number one. Number two, a foreign company in which Indian holds 50% of more shares. I hope it is clear. Moving ahead, what happens if a registration is cancelled or suspended? Now, in case the registration is cancelled, the Ministry of Home Affairs can temporarily, revoke an association's FCRA registration. In case the registration is cancelled or suspended because it was being found that the NGO is being associated in some, misuse of the funds, right? Then the registration would be cancelled, and after inspection of all the account books, right? Until a decision is being made, the association is unable to accept new donations, right, or use more than 25% of the funds. So MHA has the authority, MHA means Ministry of Home Affairs, has the authority to cancel an organization's registration, after which it will be ineligible for registration or granting of prior authorization for 3 years, right? Now an NGO's registration is cancelled after 3 years, right, and it is not eligible for registration, correct? So after 3 years, the registration of the NGO would be cancelled and it would no more be eligible for re-registration, right? I hope it is clear. Moving ahead, now let us discuss about the bill which has now become an act, the Foreign Contribution Regulations Act, Amendment Act 2020. Now the changes that they have made, we must understand them, because they may ask you the questions in the GK section, they may also ask you in the legal section, right? So because it is something, because it is a law now, it is being passed by the act of the parliament, right? It is being passed by the parliament, so it is an act now, correct? So FCRA Amendment Act 2020, prohibiting of the public servants from receiving foreign contribution, right? Now earlier the FCRA prohibited judges, government servants and employees of government owned or controlled corporations. So those corporations where the government has greater than equal to 51% of the stake, right, the public corporations. So the government servants, the public corporations and the judges were prohibited from receiving any foreign contributions, foreign donations. Whereas the current bill, the current act has amended section 3 of FCRA and has expanded the list of persons. So apart from the judges, government servant and the employees working in public corporations, the public servants of all category are being added, right? So public servants as defined in section 21 of IPC are also being added. So this is also an important move or important change. The second thing is prohibition on transfer of foreign contribution, right? So the existing section 7 of the FCRA permits transfer of foreign contribution to others, right, registered under FCRA. That means they can, whatever contribution that they are receiving, they can transfer it to others who themselves are registered under the FCRA, or who have obtained prior permissions under FCRA for receiving foreign contributions, right? but the new amendment, prohibits, the persons authorized under FCRA to receive foreign contributions from transferring such foreign contribution to any person. So now you cannot, transfer the foreign contributions to any other person, right? So in this sense, the I would say the propagation or the transmission of the foreign contribution to any other person is prohibited now, or is checked now as per the FCRA Act, Amendment Act 2020. The third change is the lowering of the administrative expense cap. Now the current bill has amended section 8 of FCRA to decrease the cap, on administrative expenses through foreign contribution to 20% from the existing 50%. Earlier, guys, whatever foreign contributions that were received, 50%, they were being, the non-profit organizations were being allowed to utilize 50% of that contribution as their administrative expenses. So they could always show them as, the administrative expenses. Whereas this limit has now been decreased to just 20%, right? So now more strict compliance mechanisms have been adopted, and the administrative expenses cannot exceed 20%. Correct. So all these things, including the public servant, prohibiting any further transfer of the foreign contribution to any person, limiting the administrative expenses, to 20%. So they all, keep a check, over the alleged misuse of the foreign contributions, right? Now the fourth is the power to prohibit a foreign contribution recipient from utilizing or receiving its funds, right? So the Act has amended section 11, right, which empowers the government to prohibit a person who had received permissions under FCRA to utilize, receive foreign contribution without government approval, if the government, based on a summary inquiry, believes that such a person has contravened the FCRA, right? So that means if a person has, has contravened the FCRA and the government thinks so, then such a person would be prohibited, to utilize or receive any foreign contribution, right? So I hope we are clear with the changes which are there in FCRA Amendment Act 2020. In this sense, FCRA Act 2020 or Amendment Act 2020 has made it more strict, right? Because there were allegations that the foreign contributions were being misused, they were being, they were not properly channelized, and they were being used to, fulfill the self-interest of the various foreign agencies. I hope it is clear, right? Number 5, it also says that the account for such non-profit organizations must be opened in SBI at New Delhi, right? So it is mandatory that the account must be opened in a branch of the State Bank of India at New Delhi, right? Number 5, it is also become mandatory that all such NPOs, whoever persons who are working in that particular NPO, the office bearers or the directors or any other key functionary, in case of foreigner, right? So they have to they have to provide Aadhaar card, right? So all the key functionaries, the directors and the office bearers, of any particular NPO has to provide the Aadhaar cards, correct? And in case of foreigner, working in any NPO, he or she has to show a copy of passport, right? Or overseas citizen of India card, correct? So in this sense, it has become more strict and stringent, right? Similarly, the Act has amended the section 13 of FCRA to give government powers to suspend the registration certificate of person for up to 360 days, right? So in this sense, if the government finds that there is a violation of FCRA Amendment Act 2020, it would, suspend the registration certificate of a person for up to 1 year, 360 days, right? Pending an inquiry for cancellation of FCRA registration, right? I hope we are clear with FCRA, when it was enacted, what were its provisions, and what all changes are being introduced in FCRA Amendment Act of 2020, right? Now moving to the next news article. America and Russia clash over the use and impact of United Nations sanctions. Now guys, we all know that America has imposed various sanctions, be it the military sanctions, economic sanctions, diplomatic sanctions or impositions over many countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea, so on and so forth, because they believe that they were, a threat to the international peace or regional stability. So therefore, many impositions or sanctions are being imposed, by United States. Now, so we'll just understand that how US and Russia are, in clash over the various sanctions, right? We all know that Russia and United States are at loggerheads over the Ukrainian crisis, where Russia has, stationed more than lakhs of their soldiers, at the Ukrainian borders, because United States has been accused of actually, expanding its NATO base and including Ukraine into a NATO country, right? So therefore, Russia is objecting against such move, and there have been many sanctions which are also being imposed on Russia. Now, students, sanctions are a potent tool that make it harder for terrorists to raise funds via international financial system, right? Now, many sanctions, it may be economic sanctions, or let's say arms embargo, wherein no trade in arms can take place, right? So such sanctions, actually make it harder for the terrorists to raise funds via international financial systems. Now, the sanctions, as you can see in the screen, like travel bans, freezing the assets, arms embargoes. Arms embargoes means no trade in arms can happen. Ban on the export of luxury goods, then commodity bans like diamonds, then bans on items, material and equipments, right? So it may be a military ban, it may be a economic sanction, so on and so forth, right? It may be a diplomatic sanction where a particular country is not being, I would say, called for any international summit or etc. So it may be travel ban, arms embargo, financial or commodity restrictions, right? Now the US Council sanctions list, right, is applicable to all the member states of the United Nations and is organized into a list of individuals, right, and a list for groups and entities, right? Now sanctions, as you can see guys, over Russia, there is a ban on entry into the country for certain persons, embargo on export of raw materials, there is a sanction against defense industry, embargo on the import, correct? Over Iran, there are finance sanctions. Why? Because Iran is, secretly manufacturing the nuclear, energy, and there are allegations that it would be using it for military purpose. So therefore, there are sanctions imposed on Iran, as we also discussed in the yesterday, where we talked about JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. There is a ban on entry into the country for certain persons, so on and so forth, right? So guys, there is definitely an impact of UN sanctions. It do affect the ordinary people, and there is definitely a lot of human suffering. Trade is adversely affected, and it targets the economy of the country. There is reduction in imports of medicines. So sanctions are never a good thing, right? But definitely it puts a pressure over any particular country, because see, war should be used as a measure of last resort, right? So under United Nations laws, there are many mechanisms available, to push country, if it is a threat to the regional stability or international peace, like the sanctions or the impositions which we are just discussing. Now guys, moving to the next article, RBI has begun a 3-day monetary policy meet to decide on key rates. Very importantly guys, this article talks about monetary policy, and we all know that first I'll talk about the Monetary Policy Committee, and then I'll explain you how the Monetary Policy Committee affects the rate of interest and the money supply in the country. So MPC of RBI, began its 3-day meeting to decide on the key rates. Now, monetary policy is the macroeconomic policy laid down by the central bank, right, the RBI. It involves the management of the money supply and interest rate, correct, and is the demand side economic policy, right. So there are many instruments which RBI uses, like open market operations, bank rate policy, reserve system, credit control policy, right, which can be expansionary or contractionary. Now, before I explain you monetary policy and how it works, let me throw some light over MPC or Monetary Policy Committee. Now, it is, see, RBI, students, you all know, was formed by the Act of 1934, and it was further amended by Finance Act of 2016, and Finance Act 2016 led to the formulation of MPC. Earlier, guys, RBI was the, and today also definitely it is the whole sole authority to regulate the monetary policy in India, right. Monetary policy which deals with money supply, interest rate, right. But in 2016, the RBI Act of 1934 was amended, and the power of monetary supply, which was the sole power of RBI, is given to a Monetary Policy Committee. And Monetary Policy Committee has 6 members, 3 from RBI and 3 are the nominees of the government. In this sense, monetary policy, which was the sole function or domain of RBI, today is being shared by MPC, and MPC consists of 3 nominees from the government and 3 from the RBI, right. So therefore RBI is not the whole sole authority today, because the government representation is also there, right. So they regulate the money supply and the interest rate, correct. So MPC as a committee which has 6 members, it meets 4 times a year, normally every quarter, right. And that RBI governor, right, you all know that the present governor is Shaktikant Das. So the governor of RBI is the chairperson, of the Monetary Policy Committee. However, the committee which has 6 members, the governor do not vote in the first instance. He only votes, to break the tie. That means he just go ahead with the casting vote, right. He just have the casting vote in case of tie, correct. That means out of 6, only 5 are voting in all, right, and the governor is not voting. So out of 5, if let's say 3 are in support of any particular decision, then that decision is with majority is being accepted, right. In case there is a tie, right, so in order to break a tie, the RBI governor would vote, right. So that is called as casting vote, correct. But in the first instance he won't vote, he just votes in order to break the tie. It is called as casting vote. Now the current mandate of committee is to maintain 4% annual inflation until 31st March 2021. However, it has been extended with an upper tolerance of 6% and a lower tolerance of 2%. That means the annual inflation, the MPC targets that the annual inflation should be 4% plus minus 2%, right. So the upper toleration limit is 4 plus 2, 6%, and the lower toleration limit or the ceiling is 4 minus 2, 2%, right. So it should be in the range of 2% till 6%, right. Now the RBI has been amended, that we have already discussed. The committee is answerable to the government of India, right. In case the inflation overshoots this range, the committee is answerable to the government of India, but if it is being continued, if it's continued for 3 consecutive quarters, that means if it is overshooting the range for 3 consecutive quarters, the committee has to answer to the government of India, right. So in this way, the MPC is made accountable to the Government of India. Now, before I go to the aspects of monetary policy, let me discuss with you the monetary policy in India. Monetary policy. Guys, in order to understand monetary policy, the first concept that should come to our mind is money supply. Money supply is the total currency, in circulation at any particular point of time, right? Total currency in circulation at any point of time in economy is called as money supply, right? मतलब मार्केट में किसी भी पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम पे कितना पैसा है उसको मनी सप्लाई कहा जाता है, राइट? इसके अंदर यू हैव करेंसीज ऑल्सो, इसके अंदर यू हैव डिपॉजिट्स इन बैंक्स ऑल्सो, so on and so forth, correct? Now RBI, which is a central bank, uses various mechanisms which affect the money supply in the country, either by increasing the money supply or decreasing the money supply. When the money supply is being increased, that means there is an infusion of money, infusion or injection of liquidity. So when the money supply is being increased, it is called as expansionary monetary policy. Right? When the money supply is decreased, that means absorbing excess liquidity. That means the RBI absorbing the excess liquidity which is there in the market, right? It is called as contractionary monetary policy. Now let us understand that how RBI does so. Now, in order to make it more clear, we must have an idea about inflation and the rate of unemployment. Now guys, inflation is the general increase in the level of prices, right? When the income levels in the country are high because there is high money supply, right? It would result into the demands getting increased. When the demands increase, people have more money to purchase. But if the supply is constant or the supply is not matching the increase in the demand because of the higher money supply, it would result into the general increase in the level of prices. So there is a general increase in the level of prices, and this is called as inflation, right? For example, yesterday, let's say 1 kg's tomato were rupees 30. Today the same commodity is, let's say, rupees 35, right? If I say that in how much rupees, in 1 rupees yesterday you were able to purchase 1/30th kg of tomato, today the person is able to purchase in 1 rupees 1/35 kg of tomato, right? So if I compare 1/30 and 1/35, which is less? Definitely 1/35. That means the value of the money degrades in inflation, right? So there is a general increase in the prices because of the higher money supply and the higher income levels, which resulting into higher demand. But if the supply is not matching the demand, it would push the prices up, right? That means there would be increase in the level of prices. and this increase in the level of prices is called as inflation, correct? And it actually, you know, degrades the value of money, degrades the value of money, because yesterday one was able to purchase 1/30th kg of tomato, today he is able to purchase just 1/35th you know, kg of tomato in the for the same rupees, that means rupees 1, right? So the value of the money has been degraded, and this is called as inflation, guys. I hope it is clear, right? Now let us understand more concepts the same. Now guys, the government always, you know, works to increase the employment levels. So the government works to increase the employment level, right? And the RBI works to control inflation. But they both are, you know, inversely related, because when you're increasing the employment, that means the money supply or the income levels are to be increased, and if money supply is being increased, definitely it would result into inflation. So there is always a fight between the RBI and the government, because government is concerned with the fiscal policy and RBI is concerned with monetary policy. So there is always a mismatch, there is always a fight between the government and the RBI, and this fight can be, you know, effectively understood from a curve which says that inflation, or in fact rate of inflation, is inversely proportional to the rate of unemployment. And this is called as Phillips curve, right? So that means more the inflation, less the unemployment, right? And the government is actually promoting the employment, that means more the inflation, less the unemployment, or more the employment, right? So they are inversely related, and that's it, that is called as Phillips curve, correct? So now I hope the things are clear. We are clear with the monetary policy, how the money supply is being you know, affected either by increasing or decreasing. The increase in the money supply is called as expansionary monetary policy, and the decrease is called as contractionary monetary policy. Now assume that the government sees that the inflation has increased, that means the money supplies are more in the market. So what they'll do, they'll absorb the excess cash, the excess liquidity in the market, you know, by various mechanisms and through contractionary monetary policy, so as to control the inflation, right? So they use it to control inflation. Right. So this is how, guys, the government uses various monetary policies. So RBI uses various monetary policy instruments to impact, you know, the money supply. Now you can see, guys, the objective of monetary policy is to maintain price stability while keeping in mind the objective of growth, right? So the growth would come only when the income levels are high, the employment levels are high, right? At the same time, the higher growth may result into inflation. So therefore the RBI has to maintain a balance between the inflation and the growth rate, right? Now the expansionary monetary policy, right, which reduces the reserve requirements. Guys, there is a ratio in macroeconomics, something called as RDR, reserve deposit ratio. That means the total reserves as a ratio of the total deposits in the bank. So you all would be knowing, students, that bank has various deposits like saving deposits, current account deposits. Then you have time deposits like FDs, RDs, so on and so forth. So the total reserves that the banks keep with themselves, you know, out of the total deposits is called as the reserve deposit ratio. And out of the total reserve, some part of that is being, you know, lended for loans, is being given for loans, you know, because through loans, you know, what the banks get, the interest, and this is actually the profit for the bank. And at the same time, some part of the total reserves they have to park, you know, with RBI in the form of CRR, also called as cash reserve ratio, right? So some portion of the total reserves out of the total deposits, right, is being kept with the RBI, is being parked with the RBI, and this is called as cash to reserve ratio in cash form, right? Some part of the total reserve is being kept with the RBI in cash form, and it is called as cash reserve ratio, and some part of that is actually being loaned out. And the banks always, you know, want to increase, you know, the loans, want to give more and more loans. Why? Because they earn interest over the loans, right? So here is the catch, and they have to strike a balance between you know, maintaining the healthy IDR and, you know, loaning it out. So through expansionary monetary policy, we have understood, students, what is expansionary monetary policy, where the money supply has to be increased, correct? Now when the money supply has to be increased, right, that means RBI would be pumping more money into the market, right? And in this sense, there are many instruments which can be invoked, you know, like repo rate. Repo rate is the rate which the RBI charges over the money it lends to the commercial banks, right? The rate which the RBI charges for the money it, you know, lends to the commercial bank in return of government securities, in lieu of government securities, right? So if, let's say, the repo rate is increased, assume that the repo rate is increased. If the repo rate is increased, that means the cost of borrowing from RBI would increase, and when the cost of borrowing from RBI would increase, the commercial banks would be discouraged to take loans from RBI, right? And therefore they would be maintaining, you know, the healthy reserves with themselves, right? They have to maintain healthy reserves, right? And when they have to maintain healthy reserves, they would loan out less, and this would, you know, result into less money supply. Let's say the repo rate is being decreased. If the repo rate is being decreased, that means more commercial banks would be, you know, more excited, you know, more interested to actually take loans at the lesser rates, and in this way they don't have to maintain healthy RDR. They can borrow the money from the RBI and can, you know, use it further for giving the loans, and when the loans would be more, the money supply in the market would be more, right? Because paise se paisa banta, right? Money multiplier, right? So more the loans, more the money supply. So in this way, students, the RBI, you know, actually impacts or alters the monetary policy, and which in turn, you know, affects the economy. I hope it is clear. So the contractionary monetary policy we just discussed before. The various instruments of monetary policy, students, like the repo rate, the rate that the RBI charges when it lends the money to the commercial banks in lieu of government or other approved securities. Reverse repo rate, the rate which the RBI, you know, the rate which the commercial banks charges, you know, when they when the RBI is, you know, taking money from the commercial banks. Similarly, cash to reserve ratio, we just discussed the portion of the total reserves which has to be parked with the RBI in form of cash, right? Statutory liquidity ratio, the portion of the total reserve that has to be maintained in the commercial banks in liquid form. Liquid form means which is very volatile, like cash, like gold, so on and so forth, right? Open market operations is where there is a purchase and sale of government securities, right, for injection and absorption of durable liquidity respectively, right? That means if there is a sale of the government securities, that means the cash from the market is being, liquidity from the market is absorbed with the RBI, right? So that means it is selling the government securities to the market, and in turn it is taking the money, right? So in this fashion, the money is being absorbed, or excess liquidity from the market is being absorbed, and when the excess liquidity is being absorbed, it results into contractionary monetary policy. Are you getting? And when, let's say, the RBI is purchasing the government securities, right? Another case, when it is purchasing the government securities from the market, it would give the money out, right? And when the RBI would give the money out, it would result into the injection of the money supply or increase in the money supply in the economy, right? So in this way, the inflation is being impacted through the open market operations, right? I hope it is clear. Now moving ahead to editorials. Guys, there was an important editorial about agriculture spendings in India in the Hindu newspaper to boost the farmer income, right? Now, the overall budgetary allocation towards the agriculture sector has increased by 4.4% in this year's budget, right? Right, so there is an increase of 4.4% in the union budget as far as the agriculture is concerned, but it is not matching the, you know, the rate of inflation, which is 5.5% to 6%. So the CPI inflation, consumer price index inflation, is in the range 5.5 to 6%. So although the good part is that the government has increased its allocation to the you know, the agriculture sector by 4.4%, but it is not matching the current inflation rate, right? Now there is an organization called as Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, right? And it is a subsidiary agency of United Nations, and it has said that India is among the top 10 countries in terms of government spending in agriculture, right? So it is a very positive outcome, you know, a report coming from the Food and Agriculture Organization. It said that India is among the top 10 countries in terms of government spending in agriculture, right, constituting a share of around 7.3% of its total government expenditure. So out of the total government expenditure, 7.3%, you know, is being spent for the development of agriculture, correct? But the sad part is India still lags behind several low income countries like Malawi, which spends 18% on Central Asian country, African country, which spends 18% on you know, agriculture. Similarly, our neighbor Nepal is also spending more than us, 8%, right? India is being ranked low. Now we can understand it by an index called as Agriculture Orientation Index, AOI. Agriculture Orientation Index. It is an index which was developed as a part of Goal 2. Guys, Goal 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which has to, for which the time period is 2015 till 2030. That means they have to be achieved by the year 2030. So the Goal 2, which talks about zero hunger, you know, and zero hunger can be possible only when there is food security in the country, correct? That means the government has to put efforts over agriculture development, right? Now there is an index to measure the agriculture productivity and the government's efforts over the same, called as Agriculture Orientation Index, AOI. Now AOI is calculated by dividing the agriculture share of government expenditure by the agriculture value added share of the GDP, right? That means what is the share of agriculture, you know, as a part of government expenditure, right? For example, in the previous slide we discussed that out of the total government expenditure, the share of agriculture is around 7.3%, right? So out of, let's say, if there 100 rupees is being spent by the government in various expenditures, 7.3 rupees is being spent on the agriculture, right? Whereas AOI, or Agriculture Orientation Index, says that the agriculture share of the government expenditure, that means 7.3%, divided by the agriculture value added to share to the GDP. That means what is the contribution of agriculture? Contribution of agriculture in GDP. Now students, if you look from this parameter, you will find that the AOI index for India is very, very low. Although the share of agriculture out of the total government's contribution, total government expenditure is fairly good, but the contribution of agriculture in GDP is still very, very low. In fact, it is dismally low, right? And major share is coming from the service sector, right? So as you can see, it is the ratio between government spending towards the agriculture sector and the sector's contribution to the GDP, right? The sector's contribution to the GDP, right? Now India's index, guys, is one of the oldest, reflecting that the spending towards the agriculture sector is not commensurate with the sector's contribution towards GDP. Guys, you would be knowing the fact that, you know, if I talk about manpower, you know, engaged in various sectors, highest manpower you can see in agriculture, followed by manufacturing, followed by services. Why? Because only skilled manpower you will find in the services sector, whereas unskilled, you know, manpower you can find in agriculture, right? However, the contribution, if I talk about the percentage contribution in GDP, it's just opposite. Agriculture has the least contribution, followed by manufacturing, followed by services. That means all the services employs very less number of people. Why? Because it requires skill set, but the contribution in the GDP for services, you know, is highest, right? So therefore we can, you know, interpret that the people who are working in agriculture fields are not contributing to the GDP, right? That means they're actually, you know, the utility is dismally low, right? And this is called as disguised unemployment. That means more people working in the field than what is required, right? जैसे घर के अंदर let's say 10 जने हैं, because in rural families you will find, you know, the larger households, right? Let's say only 4 people are required in the agriculture field, right, in the harvest season possibly, but all the members in the family, all the 10 of them are actually, you know, engaged, right, doing nothing, and that is called as disguised unemployment. So for an overlooker, it may see that they are engaged in working, but they are actually contributing nothing in the productivity, right? So this is the problem in India. Although the share of agriculture, you know, out of the total government expenditure is fairly good, that is 7.3%, but the share of agriculture in GDP is dismally low, right? And this ratio is called as agriculture orientation index, right? And it is one of the index which was developed as a part of goal 2 of sustainable development goals, which has 17 goals, right? So they may ask you the question on these lines. I hope it is clear, right? So this article talks about the poor, you know, index of AOI for India, and we are, you know, one of the worst countries, you know, even worse than various African countries, right? So the spending on agriculture sector, and how, you know, the comparison was being made that India and China are the world's largest producers of wheat, rice and cotton, correct? And if you talk about the budgetary allocation towards the agriculture sector, it shows that there has been a drastic slashing of funds through, you know, towards important schemes such as crop insurance and minimum support price. So the government has, you know, drastically reduced the funds over, you know, the crop insurance and minimum support price, correct? You all know minimum support price is a guaranteed price, or the minimum guaranteed price that is being assured to the farmers by the government, because in the times of bumper sale, when the crop yield is very, very high, right, so the price would automatically fall, correct? In those instances, you know, the government assures the farmers that this is the minimum price that we assure you, right? And this is called as minimum support price, MSP, correct? Now there have been significant reductions over many other things, like the Pradhan Mantri Annadata Aay Sanrakshan Abhiyan, PM ASHA. It experienced a significant reduction to only 1 crore as against the allocation of 400 crore in the year 2021-22, right? So last fiscal year, the allocation to PM Annadata Sanrakshan Abhiyan, also called as PM Asha, was 400 CR. This year it has been reduced to 1 crore, right? Both these schemes are pertinent to ensure MSP based procurement operations in the country, right? So even there is an overall reduction in by 718 rupees crore in total central scheme projects, right? So guys, although the contribution of agriculture, you know, as a ratio of the total government expenditure has increased to 7.3%, but its contribution in GDP is very less, number one. Number two, many schemes have also seen less, you know, funds being allocated, like PM Asha and many others like market intervention schemes and price support scheme, right? So you can see, guys, that one can still argue that the capital investment in the agriculture sector is more crucial than price support programs. There has not been any considerable and commensurate increase in the allocation towards the capital investment, right? The allocation for rural development was 5.59% in the previous budget, and it has also been reduced to 5.23%, right? And the allocation of funds towards the schemes such as PM Kisan, you know, has also been slashed. So therefore, guys, a lot to be done, you know, on the agriculture front. You all know PM Kisan Samman Nidhi was an initiative by the government in which all the farmers will be to get 6,000 rupees per year as minimum income support, and the initiative was announced by Piyush Goyal during the 2019 interim budget, correct? So there have been substantial cuts in the agriculture, and the agriculture orientation index that we have just discussed is also dismally low for India. Very, very important, and I expect a question on this, that which agency, you know, publishes this, and it is a part of which program, right? So these are the measures which can be adopted, like intensification in the government spending, development of urban infrastructure, and development of national highways, which would, you know, increase the rural infrastructure and the rural transportation, correct? And in this way, it would also, you know, increase the role of farmers in access to the markets, right? So I hope you enjoyed the session. We understood very important details today about monetary policy, the agriculture orientation index. We talked about the sanctions imposed by America, and we also discussed FCRA, right? That's all for today. Wish you all the best. God bless you. See you in the next class. Bye.